Gabriel Feltrin is here today with us. He's a professor at the Department of Sociology at the Federal University of São Carlos and researcher at the Brazilian Center for Analysis and Planning. He was invited scholar and visiting professor at the University of Oxford, Goldsmiths University of London, and Humboldt University Berlin. And he has a PhD in social sciences from the State University of Campinas in Brazil, developed with a collaborative period at the École des Hautes Études en Sciences Sociales in France. And his work is based on a long ethnography in urban outskirts, focusing on normative regimes, criminal governance, power, and violence along illegal market chains. He's the author of The Entangled City, Crime as Urban Fabric, and editor of the volume he's presenting today, Stolen Cars. The book will be discussed by Laurent Fourchat, research professor at Sciences Po Center for International Studies. And well, today's topic is stolen cars. From the moment a car is stolen, many people start making money. Where is this money circulated? What effects does it have on the illegal and legal economies? How does it impact social and political dynamics? Based on ethnographical studies spanning 5 years, Stolen Cars, a journey through São Paulo's urban conflict, tracks the journeys of stolen cars, their owners, their thieves, to examine how the patterns and mechanisms of urban inequalities and violence are reproduced. Stolen Cars is an innovative ethnography, and it's organized around the journeys of 5 stolen cars, each chapter discussing a specific theme, such as the distinctions between violent robbery and the more commercial non-violent theft, or the role of national borders interconnecting illegal and legal economies. The book provides the original theoretical framework for a rarely studied urban and transnational supply chain. Gabriel will do a presentation for around 30 minutes, and then Laurent will speak for around 10 to 15 minutes. After that, we'll give back the word for Gabriel to respond, and then we'll have time for all of you to ask your questions and make comments in a Q&A. I'd like to remind you of some of the house rules, so please keep your mic off all the time, unless you're making a question during the Q&A.
Thank you very much. A pleasure to be here. First of all, thanks Marcela for this introduction, and thanks Laurent for the discussion. Thanks to friends for coming. Patrick for the invitation as well, and also for the partnership that we are having for many years now. I would love to thank Walter, who is here as well, and Jacqueline Scott, who were very important for this book publication. We are really happy, and you can see in the screen the team that worked together for now 7 years to have this book published. We started working together in this project 2015, and we've been working at the Center for Metropolitan Studies until the end of 2019. So we had 5 years of research funded by SAM. So thank you very much for SAM as well, for the Center for Metropolitan Studies, for having us there and helping us and supporting this research. I would love to make a quick presentation. I hope it's really quick. I divided this presentation in 3 parts. First part, only to say what did you do. Second part, to state the main argument of our theoretical stuff. And the third part, trying to advance a bit what we are doing as a development of this project. So just to state what we've been doing as ethnographers, we have this very specific research question about inequalities and urban violence in São Paulo. So we've been really trying to study these illegal markets and empirically and trying to understand how they reproduce inequalities and violence. I mean, how violence is reproduced in São Paulo, why it's so durable, as well as the urban inequalities in the city. what we do is a long-term field work in Sao Paulo favelas that we, in a sense, took advantage to start this project with a lot of contact and a lot of positions in the field that helped us a lot to start. Then we've been studying journeys or trajectories. I mean, paths of people, of objects, organizations, families, because for us it's very important to have the timeline and the urban transformations like shaping our arguments. And we've been in a moment. We decided, I think it was 2018, when we decided not to study, not to compare different trajectories, but to have really people doing field work in many different spots in the same value chain. I mean, the economic stuff came to us very strongly. We at the beginning, we were only studying like how things work, where are the cars going after the robbery, and etc. But then we decided to ask also, how much does it cost here? How much does it cost there? How does it change analytical categories from a place to the other? How they are perceived here and there? So we, as a team, we had, and we repeated it many times. We at the field, we were always saying, how does it work here, and how much does it cost here? I mean, we've been really interested in codes of conduct and how things should appear in terms of the politics of circulation of those cars, but also about the materiality, the resources that were there making those cars circulate. Okay. So normativities and materialities composing our theoretical assumption that we are studying power when we are studying the urban conflict, when we are studying violence. So I start with a samba because the book starts with this samba as well. This is exactly the place we were in the scene from the introduction. We've been describing in the introduction of this book, this place. Okay. This place was an important spot of our research, and there we met this guy called Aaron. Aaron is an entrepreneur. He does many business. His most important business is an illegal one. So he is an entrepreneur for music, for football players, but also for cocaine. This guy, we've been in touch with him for some time, and he was helping us in our research. And he told us, he made a phone call to this other guy called Rosildo to make a command. He said he needed some cocaine also to distribute in this samba. And he decided to ask for Rosildo because Rosildo was arrested with him. He stayed with him in a prison for a long time. And then after being released from the prison, he moved to the Bolivian border, to the border Brazil-Bolivia, because it was very important for their business, okay? Rosildo decided to talk to this other guy called Julinho, who is a rural worker. Julinho knows very well the farms in the region because he works in those farms. And the farms in the region are placed in the border Brazil-Bolivia. So it's very easy within those farms to cross cocaine, cars, and guns, and etc. from a place to the other, okay? It's a very common practice to smuggle illegal products by those farms, not by the routes that they are mostly controlled. So Julinho and another guy decided they had this command to deliver some cocaine, but they said, no, for us, it's much better. It's worth to steal a car to deliver this cocaine because it becomes much cheaper. Okay, so they decided to steal a Toyota Hilux like this one parked here, and they did it. It was a violent robbery, and also they kidnapped a family for a while to have this Toyota Hilux stolen. Then they fled to this farm and stayed there with the Hilux until they could cross the border and exchange this Hilux by cocaine. In the Bolivian border, Brazil-Bolivia border, 1 gram of cocaine is about $2 to $3, okay? And cocaine there can be sold in 2 different ways. I mean, 5 kilos of cocaine hydrochloride there is for exportation, or 7 kilos of coca paste for the internal market in Brazil. So they are 1,000 kilometers from Sao Paulo, but a phone call from Sao Paulo produced a robbery there in the Bolivian border. Okay. When the Hilux goes to the other side of the border, it becomes legal. In a sense, because it's completely tolerated, there's no fiscalization, there's no control. You can see a car from the Bolivian government without license plates. So this car is a typical stolen car in Brazil, but there are many of them. We have researchers doing research there. This year it is the same situation that we found in 2019 when we went there. Okay. It is exactly what happens in other parts of the world. I've been doing research in Ghana months ago, and we have exactly the same situation. A lot of cars and spare parts imported from many places without no tracking, and we don't know the origin of those cars. Of course, there's a lot of stolen cars being trafficked around the world. So this cocaine comes back to Sao Paulo, and this cocaine is being sold in the samba by Samuel. Samuel is a guy that I know for a long time, not only me, part of our team knows Samuel for a long time. I met Samuel in 2005 when he was 7 or 8 years old. So I studied with his family. I do research with his family for a long time. He's Yvette's grandson. He was there trafficking, dealing drugs in the samba party. And same day we've been there. After the samba, Samuel decided to go to the shopping mall, and I've been in this shopping mall with him next day, okay? And he bought sunglasses from Oakley, and he ate at Subway, and after he paid ice creams from McDonald's for his brothers. With the money he earned, drug trafficking, Samuel could pay a lot of legal stuff. He paid taxes as well, because in Brazil we are taxed around consumption a lot. So the illegal money Samuel had in his hands became legal money in a matter of seconds, because consumption does this. Still after the samba, there's a lot of violence in Sao Paulo, okay? This map shows the racial racial patterns in the city. And then we have these spots where the police killed someone in the year 2012. Those killings have the victims, the profile of victims of those killings are exactly the profile of Samuel and Julinho. I mean, robbers and drug traffickers that has, 90% men, 70% blacks, 71% gunfire, 53% young guys. Okay, prison inmates have exactly the same profile. I mean, those victims are very regular, even if the homicide rates change a lot in Brazilian territories and time. They are the young, unskilled operators of transnational illegal economies, and they are living in favelas. Okay, so in the moment Julinho stole the Toyota Hilux and activated all this market chain, at this moment, the insurance company earned $194,000. This is the calculations we did in the book, because they have more than 100 premiums sold for each indemnization they pay. And it means that the automobile industry increased the income in 1%. That is the money that insurance companies put in the market when a car is robbed. If this car is recovered by the insurance company, and 50% of the stolen cars in São Paulo or a bit more are recovered for the insurance companies, the auctioneer earns 5% of the value of the car. I mean, the auctioneer earns 20 times more than Julinho, who stole the car. Okay, and more than 10 times what Samuel earned that day dealing drugs. This guy, one of these guys that we've been studying, especially André studied the auction, and Luis studied the auction market. One of our interlocutors became a senator of the Republic, while Julinho was arrested some years ago, and Samuel was shot and arrested last year for the second time. Okay, so this is what we are trying to sketch: the same market chain, and who is earning money, and who is being at risk, and how inequalities and violence are being reproduced while those cars circulate. So, second part, I mentioned that Julinho was arrested and Samuel was shot and arrested. Samuel was already a PCC companion or fellow. I mean, someone who is very close to PCC networks, even if he's not baptized. Julinho became a CV member. CV is a Comando Vermelho, the CV and PCC are the biggest criminal groups in Brazil. These very young guys who used to be workers, but were involved in crime, violent crime, drug trafficking, etc. They represent 2/3 of Brazilian prisons now. The average age in Brazilian prisons now is 23 years old. I mean, it's a very young population and very young, unskilled operators of those markets who are being arrested. But for me, what is interesting now that those guys become part of those very important criminal groups that are growing so much last decades. So, for example, we've been analyzing this. I won't read all the table, of course, but it's just to mention that we have here a chronology of the PCC expansion in São Paulo, saying, okay, there's a lot of security policies coming from the state, and there's also a reaction coming in a way of crime policies, reacting from the state action, and also producing a lot of very important outcomes, public outcomes in São Paulo. Those crime policies are not marginal. They are really governing lives with motivation in the city. State governance, criminal governance, coexist normative and material power regimes. For example, homicides in Brazil were rising, while homicides in São Paulo were decreasing a lot. It was produced by the instrumentalization of security policies by those criminal groups, especially PCC in São Paulo. Okay. How is it produced? It is, how could I say, it's something very important. In São Paulo state, we have 44 million people. So it's not a small result, a small outcome. It's huge, and it's being produced in a sense by the spreading of a morality, a criminal morality, saying, no, we are killing ourselves. We have to have peace among us to make our war on system. I mean, it's very politicized in peripheries during the 2000s. There's a lot of culture involved, rap, samba, etc. And those guys always, and they have a lot of mechanisms of governance as well, and instruments to make those things happen. So there's a kind of, okay, what we should be, what we should accomplish in our community. And it's not about society, it's about community, but it is a part of this regime. Another part of this regime is very material, okay? So here we have the calculations of who earns what during this exchange of cars for cocaine in different places in Brazil, okay? So I won't read all the paper, all the table, but look at the yellow column. This is a lot of money, okay? It's percent increase. When they only sell cocaine from here to there, when they exchange a car for cocaine, and when they export cocaine, we are talking about more than 2,000% of increase in prices, okay? So what I mean is that those guys, those marginal guys, those guys that are incriminated, those guys that are very poor, living in favelas, they are doing a lot of money with illegal markets, okay? And this accumulation, it is huge from 30 years now, and this accumulation could really produce the possibility to them to face the established and dominant groups in urban outskirts already in the 2000s in São Paulo, but now they are facing like big challenges and another elites in the whole country. But this accumulation allowed these criminal groups, and of course these normativities as well, allowed them to expand to all Brazilian states during the 2000s and 2010, last decade. For many Latin American countries where there's illegal markets that could be exploited. And we are now watching Interpol operations, Europol operations, arresting PCC members in Mozambique, arresting PCC members in the Middle East, PCC members working with Mexican cartels, PCC members working with European mafias, especially Italian ones and Russian ones. So, I mean, this is something global, okay? Third part, co-producing unequal and violent cities. We at the beginning of the research, we thought that car theft was a Brazilian problem, especially a Brazilian problem. But the data is unbelievable. There is more cars being stolen in Europe than in Brazil last years. The difference is that in Europe, and we don't talk about United States, it's huge, and Mexico also huge. Well, those stolen cars are in Brazil. Half of them are violent robberies, and in most parts of the world, it's not. So it changes the how it shows to the public, but the market's there behind it. And of course, when we stopped this project and wrote our book, we just passed it through a more international project that is being financed by ANR now, and it's called Global Car. But the connection between car markets and cocaine markets produced what we are watching in our cities now. I mean, our cities in the global south, in the global north, because things are really connected now in terms of markets. We've been watching, and Isabella is field work in Santos Port. We've been watching like seizures growing up in a exponential way. 10 years ago, if we have a seizure of 30 kilos of cocaine, it was a big seizure. Now we are talking about 3 tons and sometimes more. So it's a lot of money, because now is yeah, other calculations. We can come back because I'm late, but look at that. 1 gram of cocaine is in Berlin. We've been doing field work in this park, in Wurlitzer Park in Berlin. 1 gram is about $115. It was $2-3 in Bolivia. So the Hilux Julinho stole, put in the market, in these illegal markets, more than $500,000. But we had 500,000 stolen cars only in Brazil that year. I mean, we are talking about big money. And of course, Julinho got $150, $150, Samuel $250, and they delivered the money they earned very quickly to the legal markets again by consumption, as we saw. But the auctioneer earned $3,000. He's a big man in Brazil. The insurance company, $200,000. And the international dealers, much more than them, okay? So big part of this money stays in Berlin, never left Berlin. The end of this chain is in Berlin, okay? It starts in São Paulo, it goes to Bolivia, it comes back to São Paulo, to Santos Port, it comes to Berlin. And cocaine is sniffed there, okay? So the money doesn't flow from to another parts of the world. And of course, there's no violence related to criminal or armed violence in Berlin, but there is in São Paulo. So the more you earn, the farther you are from violence. And of course, inequalities between Berlin and São Paulo, but also between elites, middle classes in São Paulo and the guys that we got in touch are being reproduced at that same time. So let's discuss this a bit. Thank you very much, Sam, again, and thanks for this wonderful team. Some of them are here now. So we have here Debbie, André, Lucas, Greg, Luana, Isa, Ijana, and Juliana, above all. Thanks. Let's discuss a bit.
Thank you, Gabriel, for your presentation. I will now pass on the word to Laurent Fourchat for his comments.
Thank you, Gabriela, and thank you, Gabriel, and thank you, Marcela, for inviting me, and thank you, Fatoumata, also asked me to join the seminar and to read the book. I mean, the presentation is fascinating in itself, and larger actually than what is the book. You added quite a number of new data, stories, photos, and maps that are not even on the book. So I will stick on the book, however, that I've read. I'm quite impressed by the book. It's a long time I've not read a so fascinating book, actually. So just 2 or 3 or 4 reasons for why I love that book. First, I mean, this is a classical anthropology in a way. So you follow objects. So this is very classical, probably in anthropology and sociology, so since Sapadouai. But using that method for stolen cars, this is much less common, I guess, and probably much more complicated than any other object. And I guess to do that, there is a probably very long historical familiarity of you and your team and colleagues with Sao Paulo favela word, criminal and non-criminal groups. But I guess this is not sufficient explanation either. I mean, to reconstitute their stories, I guess that you need some brokers or intermediaries, without which that kind of research is not possible. And you have not mentioned so much in the book, and maybe this is a detail, but maybe this is something that you might explain here for master and PhD students and for everybody, because I mean, this kind of research is not so easily feasible. So maybe, yeah. So the second reason why I love the book, I think that you follow both the thing and you follow the person. And so the book could be read as a kind of a novel, or even as a synopsis for a police series, actually. So you start with the robberies or stealing of cars with the main protagonist. So, and you finish with the insurance companies. So it was the hand. So I was amazed in by the capacity of the whole team to be so accurate, to find out the actors involved, and the description of the main characters. I mean, there is always a sociological background of the thieves, the robbers, those who are robbed, the insurance company entrepreneurs, second-hand car buyers, truck drivers. All this is really fascinating. You like clothes. Even if I was not always too sure why you describe so much all these clothes. Probably manifestation of class belonging, but I don't know. That's a detail. What's a fascinating point in the book is this is a collective writing, okay? But this is a so demanding exercise. And of course, this kind of exercise is quite tricky and quite complicated, because there is always differences in the style of the writing from one chapter to the other. And here is not so much the case, actually. Of course, there are some light differences between from one chapter to the other. So you follow the car probably more in the first chapters, and you follow people more in the last chapters, I would say. But this is a detail in a way, and I was amazed by the fact that you have a kind of strict methodology to start with in the fieldwork. Then you have this kind of writing style in a way, and same analytical framework throughout the book. And this is really impressive. So congrats for that. The third point why I love the book is that you're not following one car, but 5. And this helped to show the diversity of illegal car markets and their connections with their legal equivalent. And this is very efficient method to see the different journeys of the cars, both that could be, or that they could stay in the illegal circuits and sold against cocaine in Bolivia, or dismantled in spare parts in clandestine chop shops in Sao Paulo. Others go instead into the legal circuits when they are recovered by insurance companies and resold on auction. So this diversity is just incredible, and so this is also really fascinating. So for our last point, as an introduction, but I won't speak for too long. There is a permanent blurring line between legality and illegality, and this is one of the key dimensions in the book. And this gives also its backgrounds for all the arguments on the reproduction of violence, on urban inequality, on the coexistence of normative regimes, on police violence. So I will just stick to these three last points. So plural orders, reproduction of violence, and police. And I have a few questions, but these questions are details. So you suggest that concerning plural orders and normative regimes, I was very convinced by coexistence of normative regimes that maintain urban order in Sao Paulo. So this is very convincing. So for instance, you mentioned that state police have the monopoly of legitimate violence in some part of Sao Paulo, while PCC have the same monopoly in other parts of Sao Paulo. And you also mentioned that this coexistence of normative regime is also felt by individuals who are caught sometimes in these plural orders. There is the story of Douglas working for insurance company, and so working for that company, but living in a place where the PCC is important, and come to ask him as a member of the community tricky questions about how he recovers a stolen car. This is fascinating. So you see how this normative regimes play through individual, and this is really great. So there is a kind of permanent play with the law in the book, which is really fascinating. And here I quote you in the conclusion. You mentioned here the stories of each of our 5 stolen cars and the associated companies are an attempt to demonstrate that the idea of polarity between legal and illegal mediated by state law may have been once useful to describe urban society, but this is not anymore the case to describe urban conflict. So this is what I found fascinating in the book, is the transformation of illegal vehicles into legal ones. This is a story which I found fascinating. But maybe the claim you made at the end probably is I guess there is a literature that have worked this blurry line between the legal and the illegal, both in Latin America and elsewhere. I mean, this is reminded in one way afterward. But in other part of the world, of course, this has been looked at or worked at. I found, I guess, that twilight institutions by Learned in Africa, or literature on vigilance groups, the forbearance by Douglas, looking at the deliberate and intentional suspension of the law, or somebody who you are more familiar with, like Matthias Dewey on the suspension of the law that directed towards specific social groups, is something which is actually common. And so I was asking whether this frontier between the legal and illegal has not been more worked out than what you suggest in the conclusion. That's a very small question. Another very small question, but this is a second aspect probably on the reproduction of violence and urban inequality. You mentioned, and once again, this is convincing throughout the book, that the most subaltern actors always carry, are the one who are always carrying out the violence in the illegal car market. They are the one who are targeted by the police, they are the most victim of violence, while they are also the most badly paid, actually. And as you looked at this illegal traffic, stolen car, you also look at the other part of the business, and you mentioned how the auctioneer are successful businessmen who are never victim of violence in a way. And so this is really convincing throughout the book. There's dichotomies between where you stay in this legal market. This dichotomy is very relevant in the reproduction of violence, especially in the poor areas of Sao Paulo. Maybe I was less convincing against, that's a small detail again. I'm asking small questions about small details toward the end in the conclusion, I guess, about comparing the level of violence in Berlin and Sao Paulo, and saying, okay, there is less repression in Berlin than in Sao Paulo, but I was asking whether we can isolate the issue of selling drugs in Berlin from the historical contextualization. Of course not, but so that was maybe a small detail question again. So last point, and I will end up here, it's about the police. So police is almost everywhere in the book, and maybe this is my main criticism, but never really described as accurately as all the other actors in the book, in a way. So, of course, you mentioned here that there are sometimes some interactions with the police. So there is one interviewee who died from the police violence. There are one or two examples of police forcing individuals to pay a bribe, but most of the time the claims about the police are general claims about their corruption, about their violence, but not so much the description that you are using for all the other actors. So there is a poor emphasis on the bureaucratic interface with the police. And I found that a bit strange, actually, because the police seems to be at the core of the urban conflict. So I was asking why the police was in the description not so much informed in the book. Is it a question of methodology, or maybe it's more difficult to follow the police than anywhere else? So I will stop here. And once again, congratulations for the book. I so much enjoyed reading it.
Thank you, Laurent, for your comments. I will pass on the word back to Gabriel for his response. But if you on the audience already have a question or comment, you can already type in the chat the question, or if you prefer to speak later on, just leave us a note there and then I'll pass on the mic after that. Gabriel, go ahead.
Thanks, Laurent. It was very nice to hear from you and to have your comments. So I will try to comment part of it, starting from bottom. I mean, in São Paulo, it's harder to study the police than crime, sure. And we don't have as much contact in the police as we have in crime. And in a sense, it's dangerous to be both, to do research in both sides, you know? So they really live a war, and they behave like being in a war. I mean, criminals and policemen. And especially those last years with Bolsonaro pushing the police to the politics. Sociology became something that policemen hate in São Paulo. So if we introduce ourselves as sociologists or anthropologists, it blocks our access to the field with policemen. Even if, of course, we could, at least in the borders or in other regions a bit far from São Paulo, we could do a lot of research with policemen. But that's the reason that they are not so well described and so deeply studied in this book as criminals are and other like middle class and elite groups are. It is I completely agree with you and with your point. It is very hard to be part of those police groups if you are not someone who they consider to be from the most closest relations, because they act as a political group. The police is autonomous politically in São Paulo. So, but I think that's the reason. About the literature and the borders between legal, illegal. I know they are very well discussed in literature, but in terms of urban analysis and in terms of political analysis and governance analysis, we are still completely state-centric. We still assume that that the state is the ruler of the city. And when we talk about policies, when we talk about urban order, we are always talking about the most part of literature. I would say 90% or more of the literature are always assuming that the state is the ruler. And I think in Global South, it's not the case for most part of the population, or at least the state rules part of the policies. For example, if a guy has a health issue, he goes to the health system when it exists, as in Brazil. But for most part of their daily needs, they won't ask for the state or consider the state as the most important actor. When I was doing field work in Africa, it was clear for me that we had exactly the same situation. I mean, most people rely on their communities, ethnic groups, churches, not the state. If they want to have a job, they won't go to public agencies. I mean, the state is the ruler and produces and really is hegemonic to rule the urban order in the north, in parts of the north. But if we go to Port de la Chapelle, we will see the drug dealers producing another region, and they are not so strong as they are in São Paulo. But it's a kind of autonomous zone inside Paris, and it's not regulated by the same way, even if there's a very there's very much essays of controlling by the state. But if you live in São Paulo favela, you can like live years there without any contact with like people saying, okay, I will do this or that in the same rationality that we see in the middle classes or in the elites. I was wondering about a friend of mine who came from my field, a friend who is also an interlocutor of research, and he was at home, and I was talking to my son about the school, and I didn't realize he was paying attention. But the other day he said, no, the most important, the most unbelievable stuff that I understood being with you and etc. is that your kid, your son, and the school, you are aligned, you are in the same mood, you are talking the same language. Because for me, the school is something completely far from our reasoning or our understanding. The school is always the other. The school is not someone who is part of my life. So this is more or less the metaphor we are trying to develop when we are talking about this legal and illegal, because the illegal is because of the state, of course, and the crime is constructed by the state. And I forgot to mention that I was presenting one journey presented in the book, but of course we are sketching 5 journeys. Thank you very much, Lohan, for stating this. About the brokers, you are completely right. We are constructing those contacts and those networks and the confident relationships with a lot of people. And of course, for this research, we had to have many other brokers to have access to the field. So it was a very important thing that we've been discussing in our team for a long time. And those brokers come from very different places. I mean, we have some stories that come from our families. other stories come from our networks of sociability. Other stories we are like searching for someone who can get in touch with the truck driver who is blah 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 blah, transporting spare parts and etc. So we have some active search for brokers in a sense. In other moments, we had to use the contacts we had for 20 years doing field work in the same places and etc. So it was mixed, and thanks for highlighting this, because it was for us something very important, and maybe it's not so well described in how we did those contacts in the introduction. About normative regime and social order, I think you were right also. And thank you very much for your comments. For us, it is a very important project for me and for this team, for sure. It was very demanding, as you said. It was very demanding. It was very challenging. We've been working a lot for years, and we survived. So, and I think we survived it well, because we are good colleagues and also friends. So thank you very much. I would love to hear from my teammates as well. You mentioned the guy who is hunting cars and in between the PCC and the insurance company. It comes from Debbie work on the insurance companies. We discussed this a lot, and this is very important for the book.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up the floor for questions and comments. If anybody wants to start.
Really well done, Gabriel. The book and the presentation are really interesting. I can imagine for the foreigners must be even more interesting than for us. Your research is, as you know, very creative, innovative, precise. So well done. And I have the feeling that you got something that you were trying to do during the research, which was to understand in details how the political economy of crime works in Brazil, and what inequalities, what kind of inequalities this political economy produces or reproduces. And you also showed, and it's really clear from the book, that the state-centered narrative does not explain much, to say the least. But it's not so clear to me what you put in place in terms of governance, or how these circuits are governed. What's the overall pattern of governance and coordination of these networks? In some moments, it seems that it's money that governs the networks by itself and regulates what's going on. And in other places and in other moments, it seems that the criminal organizations are governing. But you have a very strong argument about the PCC way of governing, which is not exactly a mafia-like organization, very differently. So could you elaborate more on this, please?
Sure. No, thanks for the question, because it's exactly what we are trying to discuss, Edu. And first of all, thanks for all your support in all these years, because it was always Edu saying, no, go on, always criticizing and always saying go on. So thank you very much. And look, for us, I think I really talk by the team now. In this book, for these markets, for these market chains, we are talking about three regimes of governing, I would say, governance, maybe. I mean, first regime is the state, and I didn't talk about the middle of the book, where this discussion is being really strong, especially the works of Luana Mota and Deborah Fromm and Isabella Pinho. No, they are really dealing with those, and Gregorio. So they are really dealing with those three regimes. I mean, in the case of dismantling cars, it's very clear because you have the law coming from the state, but this law is very, very disputed because we are discussing in the middle of the book a law in São Paulo which became known as the dismantling law, the law to regulate the dismantling of a car. It was completely unregulated 10 years ago, and it became, and a law came to regulate this former illegal market. So it's a kind of, how could we regulate an illegal market? We have these in São Paulo with the spare parts. So we have the law coming from the state, and we start from below. I mean, we start from the changes in the dismantling yards. I mean, an illegal dismantling yard or an informal dismantling yard, it had to change because the law had changed. But the police was earning a lot of money with this, with those informal dismantling yards. So the police was not happy with the change in the law, and the police cannot. The policemen, I would say, not the police as an institution, but the policemen who were there having their bribes and etc. They were very unhappy. So they organized themselves. Not publicly, because they can't say publicly that they want continue to have bribes, but they organize themselves as a political force, as a group of interest, and they came to very different spaces to be against some small changes, some technical stuff in the law with their lawyers. But at the same time, they want to pressure the guys in dismantling yards, the owners, to continuously paying them, even if they are adapted to the legal stuff. And the police became very strong at the end, really politically dealing with a law change, what happened with the law. And the criminal world, the criminal guys also decided to act because they could lose a lot of dismantling yards if they became legal, and they will have higher prices and etc. So the crime also decided to change their way of having stolen cars for dismantling. For example, they stopped to rob violently to dismantle a car because it was an opportunity for the police, because a robbed car is violent. The insurance company is activated in the same moment. So they improve technology and etc. to have more thefts than robberies. So in a sense, those three regimes were acting to regulate the market in our view. The police silently, the crime silently, and the state in public debates, but of course with backstages working a lot. And it started with the Workers' Party, this law, but then it became from the PSDB and etc. So a lot of political disputes around this law as well. So I think chapters 5 to 7 are the chapters that we are really trying to sketch these three entangled regimes regulating the same market with different reasons and different orders, really.
Okay, we have a question from Patrick, and then later on I'll read
Patrick.
Thank you, and really, like the other ones, can I just really tell you how great this book is? I mean, what a fantastic piece of work, and it's both incredibly rich empirically, very strong analytically and theoretically, and also very innovative in the work which is done. I mean, this is just urban research at its best, and really well done for the book. Let me push 2 or 3 issues. I have millions of questions because it's so much in the book, but you would like to really push too many things, but that will be for another time. Just for this discussion, the first one, I'd like to push you a little bit. You know, there's a big debate about how do we do comparison in urban studies with a lot of inductive and my friend Jenny Robinson doing a lot of different things, sometimes more philosophically inspired. This is comparison in a very different way, with both very strong ideas and a very clear framework, as was mentioned before, but also very strong empirically. And I think what is interesting is, as you said, comparing both the circulation of money and cars, and also comparing a little bit, you know, not really the cases, but the context within which and the circulation. So, you know, would you be able to elaborate a little bit, now that the research is done, what do you think are the key insights for thinking in comparative terms, and this sort of, you know, but I think there's a real added value in the way you can think in comparative terms for urban studies. My second question is very different. In a way we have, and it's very self-centered, sorry about that, but Laurent Fourchard will understand why I asked that. We have debates with our administration here on what sort of risk the students can take. So I would like to know more a little bit what was your protocol to analyze how far could you and the group go in doing the research, and how you organize rules of the game on what could be done or not done. You already mentioned the case of police, but can you tell us a little bit more about that? And my third question, and I'll stop there, is you know, one of the, I think, strength of a book and his research is always thinking about money and following the money. And of course, we, you know, would like to push you a bit more, thinking what does it tell us about shadow banking, about the recycling of dirty money, and the extent to which there may be some connection to aggregate with some other money lending. But that's not for today. What I would like to know is, you mentioned very precisely that some people were making small amount of money, but some people are making a lot of money. So what is the strategy of accumulation of this, some of the people dealing with cars and drugs, and what is the impact on the favela? To what extent this accumulation of capital has an impact both on social hierarchies, but also on, you know, investment in the city, developing various programs, or you mentioned the consumption for the low groups, but, you know, you could imagine, and I'm sure you, that this accumulation of money has very strong impact on São Paulo. Thank you, and well done again. It's great book.
Thanks, Patrick. So again, starting by the last question. It is something that we've been discussing for a long time, because the question of accumulation and what to do with the money they have. There's only one favela in São Paulo when I really see like the biggest guy from the drug trafficking and PCC, the same guy who is economic actor and political actor in the favela, that is really redistributing money and doing kind of urban policies, sanitation, and improving commerce, and building schools and etc. There's only one favela in São Paulo where I see it. Normally it's private use only. I mean, there's a lot of accumulation, and people can pay $300,000 in a car, or in a boat, or in helicopters, and etc. So it is really interesting how in the normativity of the crime, they never talk about redistribution. They always say, no, if I got it, it's my, because I worked hard, because I never gave up, because I was there. during the night, doing stuff while you were drinking beer, etc. So meritocracy rules in crime as well. So they are, and even in rap songs, they are completely moral and communitary and etc. and pro like community stuff, and etc. They always say that if my money is mine, you have nothing to do with this, and etc. Of course, I mean, there's a lot of accumulation in the top in terms of economic stuff. The guys who are the economic entrepreneurs and have their hired people and etc., they accumulate a lot. And I was interviewing a guy who used to be a very strong man in PCC, and who is allegedly the person who decided how the PCC would work after 2002, I mean 20 years ago, separating money from the politics. He said, no, we will really work in this organization without having bosses. So we will be equal all the time. So each one has his money, and money is private. Money is not of the organization. Okay, so you have your money. The organization helps you to have your money, but the organization has no money. So this is more or less how those things connect, because it's quite individually, it's quite individualistic when we are talking about money, and completely communitarian when we are talking about rules, power, etc. So it's very, very interesting, this way of them. And about money laundering, PCC now reached all the markets, I would say. I mean, real estate, commerce in many issues, urban transportation, garbage, and many guys who are doing this stuff now, they are legal entrepreneurs. They are no longer criminals, because they accumulated so much, and they could escape from criminal markets to legal positions. So it impacts for sure the urban economy and etc. But we couldn't measure this. It is a project to be done, I would say. About ethics, research ethics, and how far to go doing research. For us, of course, we have regulations, etc., institutional regulations, and it's okay. But among us, it was very important to be 100% safe in the field. So for us, we had some statements in the team. I mean, we never go to criminal actions. We never go to criminal situations in terms of, we never jump into a stolen car. We never go to criminal scenes. And of course, we won't stay in places that we not feel 100% safe. We always talk about that. So we usually follow routines, and we really follow people who are living their daily lives, and then we reconstruct trajectories. So for example, the scenes of robberies, they are either reported to us by interlocutors who robbed or who were robbed, or we describe videos from YouTube scenes. There's a lot of crime scenes taped today, and we can describe those scenes from various perspectives, and then we reconstruct the scene with our characters. So we try to make it very clear in our introduction that we are using a method of reconstructing narratives, reconstructing trajectories in terms of typicity, what is typical, and in terms of what we really found in the field. I mean, every character that is there in the book, we really found them in the field. And if seen, all the scenes that are there are real scenes as well, but we match it, those things to make it possible to connect the whole trajectory, the whole journey along the market chain. So that was our discussion in those issues, and I think it was successful because we could really get in touch with these situations without being in risk. And about comparison, what we are trying to do is a bit to escape a bit from comparison and to really touch transnational research. To really, if we, for example, if we have the analytical unit on, how an example, if we have an analytical unit of, for example, homicides, and then we compare different places. So what we are, it is good, and of course it could be very productive. But in our case, what we are trying to do is to have an analytical unit that is transnational. For example, the circulation of a spare part from United States to West Africa and then to Brazil. So if we have this as an analytical unit, we can stop in different points of this transnational stream, and we could really do transnational research in different points, in different spots of the same analytical unit. So we wouldn't compare, for example, selling parts here or there, but we definitely will compare how people are earning money with spare parts here or there, because the spare parts circulation is our analytical unit, and we are doing research in the United States, in Dubai, and in Ghana. There are the places where normally from the north spare parts circulate. So that's what we are trying to do. And then second step would be, who is regulating the spare part markets in Ghana? Who's regulating it in Dubai? Who is regulating it in United States? I could say Toyota is a big company that is doing this in those three situations, and there's a lot of others that are not, or are in a place and not in another. So we are really trying to escape a bit from comparing the same analytical unit in different places and trying to find analytical units that are transnational and doing research in different places and in the same chain. That's our goal. After this project, we had this INR, and we are really trying to do it. Let's see what comes from. But it's our tentative. Thanks a lot, Patrick, again.
We have a question from Marcos Campos. He posted in the chat, but I think he can, if he wants, he can speak as well.
Yes, thank you. Gabriel, thank you very much for the presentation. I'm really, I'm a big fan of your work and Namage's work. I have a question in relation to money, the money issue on your research. Because I actually didn't read the book chapters, but I feel that your framework is mostly concentrated on the idea of following the objects, right? And also in each part of the stream that you said, you're trying to quantify how much money is circulated there, right? If that's the idea. I mean, like how much the Samuel earns and how much the drug dealer in Berlin earns. So my question is, and I don't know, maybe that's a suggestion for another way of thinking those things is, how does actually, if you try to not deal with the idea of the circulation through the idea of quantification, but to follow the money in a way that the money is also an object that we can follow. I mean, like what type of money circulates in each type of specific place of the streams? I mean, like the money that Samuel earns is a specific money. I'm using the perspective of Vivian Zelizer in the idea that it is a special money in a sense that it has morality and has specific ways of how it circulates, and a materiality also. I mean, like in the money that circulates through the private companies that they do the insurances, it's a different money also. And the money that I mean, like, how can we learn? What types of things can we learn about this trend if we look at the different types of money that circulates? This is just an idea. I don't know if it can help.
No, great. Look, we've been studying the two literatures to discuss the money. I mean, and they state very different things. There's Zelizer that you mentioned, saying money has always meaning, has always social meaning. There's always dirty money and clean money, honest money and money that are not good, and etc. And there's Zimmel, one century in 20 years, stating the opposite, saying money has no qualities, money has only quantity. That's what money is. A quantity is no quality at all, and etc. He goes the opposite direction of Zelizer. And we've been discussing this stuff and with some friends who are much better than us to do this. And what we concluded at the end is that both are right, because the scale they are discussing are very different. If we talk about Samuel, in his specific case, he couldn't spend his money at home or support his mother and etc. because she doesn't accept that. But at the same time, he can help indirectly, putting some fuel in the car, or having some food from the supermarket, and etc. So it was tricky at that scale, because of course money is market and has different social meanings at that scale of the lived life, everyday life. But when we are talking about the increase of profit in the insurance companies, in financial markets, when at that scale, there's no markers, there's quantity, I would say. So if the money comes from somewhere or from other guys, no problem. If it comes from legal origin or illegal origin, at the end of the day, the guy from McDonald's closed his shop and he has some money there who is completely abstract and completely without quality, and it's in the bank and it goes through international flows and etc. So I think it's a matter of scale, and we have a huge discussion in anthropology and sociology, but in my view, we could really work with both literatures, the literature that say money always have money has quality and money is only quantity, you know. So I think it's possible. It depends on the meaning money will have in different situations, in different empirical situations. That's what we tried also to show in the book, because sometimes we are talking about economic flows from Latin America to Europe, and sometimes we are talking about Samuel having some food in the shopping mall. So I think it's different.
Yes, Regine, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, thank you very much for this interesting presentation and insights. I'm working in Berlin at Free University, but I'm working on organized crime in Brazil. So probably you know more about Görlitzer Park. But I have one question about Görlitzer Park. In our view in Berlin, this is a kind of marginal, very marginalized field of drug trafficking. it's a very marginalized field. It's people from Africa who wouldn't get allowance to stay in Germany. They are in a precarious legal situation, and they are only getting the crumbs of the cocaine trafficking, because the real cocaine trafficking works by taxi and is quite exclusive and is more in the hands of Arabic families, kind of Lebanese clans, etc. So when you research the Görlitzer Park, probably the money which is being earned there goes as remittances back to Africa. So it's kind of the circle continues. No? And my question is whether you got a little bit deeper into these hierarchies of drug trafficking within Berlin. Did you follow this up? It would be very interesting for me. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for this question. I love to be in this specific site, and I've been visiting Humboldt University for 6 months, 2017. That was the time we've been there. Me and Deborah also doing research in this specific part. And what we found there is exactly the same mechanism that we found here. I mean, the guys who are in the most precarious situations in a society, they find a possibility of social mobility by drug dealing. So they are really precarious. They come from very different countries in Africa, West Africa, and Northern Africa especially. And they, of course, are not having very big commissions. But as I realized doing research there, they were only understood as migrants because, of course, there's a political question framing the debate on migration and violence. And they, of course, we cannot glue those things and say, oh, they are dealers because they are migrants and etc. So that's the same situation here in Brazil. For example, violent crime in Brazil comes from favelas. Violent crime, armed crime with guns and etc. It comes from favelas. But of course, we can't do the other reason, saying, okay, favelas are violent, favelas are the house for criminals and etc. etc. So it is very tricky. And it's very good to be an outsider and especially from the Global South to do research in those places, because when we are talking to the dealers there at Görlitzer Park, they, oh, I'm from Brazil. First thing they say, oh, may we have some contacts there to buy like cheap cocaine and etc. No, let's talk about it. But we were really working at that level. We didn't follow up. Of course, we heard a lot of stories of the bikers who are security forces at clubs and also taxis. We've been talking a lot with a taxi driver who is also a friend from Eastern Berlin, and he, of course, told many stories about how things happen, and it's exactly what you mentioned. And we were exactly interested in this low operating stuff, because we know those guys are not having much money, but we know how much money is passing through their hands. So exactly in the case of Samuel, he is earning $250 in a night in a samba party dealing drugs, and it is a minimum wage in Brazil. I didn't mention it, but in the book we work only with minimum wage as a currency, so we could compare how much a guy earns here and there and etc. So, for example, a Toyota Corolla is about 13 minimum wages in the United States, but it's 100 in Brazil. So it is also a mechanism to reproduce inequalities. But those guys at Berlitzer Park, they are the unskilled and fragile and operators of a huge market. They are marginal, but the market they are putting into operation is not marginal at all. That's the thing for us. I would love to have more information on that. We could continue the discussion after.
Nick?
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Gabriel. It was a really fascinating presentation, and I'm really looking forward to reading the book. So thanks for that. I just wanted to ask a question really about some of the kind of politics involved here, because you talked quite a lot about the economics here, which was fascinating. But you kind of spelt out in the presentation some of the normativities, such as war on the system, and there seems to be a link between the kind of systemic grievances on the prison system and the emergence of the PCC, kind of historically speaking. And you also kind of mentioned in your recent comments in the answer to some of the questions about the individualistic tendencies of these actors in terms of their relationship to wealth and money and profit, and a kind of tendency not to redistribute wealth within certain communities. But I guess I wondered to what extent, through the different regimes of power and control that you kind of talked about, and the types of social order and political order that they kind of dominate and reside over, they could also be considered political actors, So, even though they have a focus on accumulation, on capital accumulation, how do they also shape the relationship between communities and the state, for example? Or, how do they shape beliefs and ideas and the politics that are playing out in certain communities? And how do these interactions kind of link with the types of economic activities and kind of the criminal markets and political economies that you're talking about? So yeah, it was just really to kind of dig into the politics there a little bit more.
Thanks, Nick. Good to hear from you. It is personally the most important matter for me, the most important subject. I will give you an example that doesn't come from the book, but it's quite related. But talking about the police, we've been in many situations in Brazil talking with policemen that are living in houses that they can't afford with their salaries by far. I mean, places along beaches in Rio, places very luxurious places, and etc. Then we said, okay, corruption, it's normal. Then we realized that policemen started to occupy human rights councils in municipalities, and then they occupied in human rights councils in the state of São Paulo. Then they decided to go to gender questions. Then they had a political action against drugs in the schools, and they were learning kids that they don't have to use drugs and etc. Then they become evangelical partners, and they become part of each evangelical church in the city. Then they have a kind of solidarity neighborhood. What does it mean? Basically, to have a WhatsApp group with people from the neighborhood telling the policeman what is happening, who is the suspicious or not. So then we have the former policemen, I mean the retired ones, occupying administrative positions in municipalities. And then after 20 years, we had a candidature of Bolsonaro. They were strong enough to have a presidential candidate. Of course, they have to have much other groups with them. But Bolsonaro was made inside the military police, and we could follow the politicization of the policemen that were, in a sense, earning a lot of money, in another sense, saying, no, it's not right. Gender relations in the school, no. Look at this, look at that. We have to react, we have to react. And they are reacting, and they are doing politics. And they are in churches, they are in schools, they are in the neighborhoods, they are in the media. They have police television programs 4 hours each day in the afternoons in all the televisions. I mean, they are very strong in terms of political action and capillarity of the, and they have grassrooted political action that supports Bolsonaro government for 4 years now, and they are strong enough to support Bolsonaro there. At the same time, they are reaching more and more and more public budgets, because they have deputies, they have senators, they have judges, and etc. and etc. So they have a regime of power that is against the state. This regime of power is trying to break the democratic state, the modern state, in a sense. So I'm talking about the policeman, and the policeman is a specific case because they can be legitimate to have political power. They accumulate, they have ideologies, they have their bases, they have political power, and they want to break with this system, this established system that for them is completely corrupted and etc., even if they are completely corrupted for us. Okay, so in terms of criminal action, I think it's different because they don't focus the state as the policemen do. The criminal actors focus on the markets only. They want, different to the policemen, they are not allowed to be candidates, or if they are candidates, they will be investigated and etc. It's not interesting for them to be candidates and to occupy the state positions, but they focus on markets. So they focus on urban markets, gold, mines, environmental stuff, etc. Whatever, real estate market. If I have a lot of money, why not to buy a farm? If I have a lot of money, why not to buy a restaurant? And there's a lot of illegal money circulating in this way. And as in terms of crime, as they are a brotherhood, they are always helping themselves to have much more money, and that's their political power. So I mean, in terms of politics, for me, there is the state, but not necessarily people are trying to have the state power. People can really work in different regimes in terms and having a lot of money, having a lot of connections, having a lot of power, I mean, without having state positions. And of course, it is against the state. It's crime is against the state in this sense. Of course, they want to instrumentalize the state action, but they are against the state because they are not modern in terms of politics. They do not accept the rules of politics, saying, okay, if you want to be someone in politics, you have to have a party or etc. For example, the criminal guys who want something from the state, they don't care the party in power. They simply want their decision made, that decision made to have easily accumulation and etc. So for them, that's for me the main question. Those kinds of brotherhoods those kinds of fraternities, they are being reproduced in mafias in Nigeria, in Sao Paulo, in Mexico, and etc. And it is not state-centered at all, and it is powerful. So that's my thing when we are discussing the regimes and etc. Bolsonaro came from another narrative of the world. I mean, he came from a party, but he decided the party to go 2 weeks before the limit of registering in a party. And he's doing the same now, again, for re-election. So he's not from the political system. He is someone who worked there for 30 years against the political system, and he won based on ideologies that are completely anti-modern and anti-democratic and etc. So this is for me the main issue, because when we see, for example, ISIS is another power regime. ISIS is not we could not compare one type of state and another type of state and call this the Islamic State. I mean, it's another type of power regime or political power, I would say. So it's hard for me to formulate this, especially in English, but that's what we are trying to develop. And it's very worrying for me, at least.
Okay, we have time for one last question if anybody wants to hop in. Or otherwise, I'll just do it myself. I had a few questions, but I'll stick to the most simple one, I think, so that we don't run out of time here. I mean, the book presents a very interesting methodology and also in this connection between the ethnography of objects and classical issues in urban sociology. And I think the choice of the car is really really interesting because it's also such a pervasive feature of the Sao Paulo landscape as in many cities all over the world. But I just wanted to ask you precisely just to walk us through the choice of those 5 cars and what do they represent?
With this thing of journeys and choices, we have been discussing this long meetings, and the main question was what is typical. I mean, it is more common to have a Toyota Hilux stolen in Sao Paulo or in the borders. No, it is in the borders. So let's reconstruct a trajectory from the border. What is the most stolen car in the city? Okay, this one. So we have to have this one. And what happens with these small cars normally? By statistics, by data, and by reports from the field, what happens with the small cars? This happens. Normally they are dismantled or recovered. So we have small cars in our book being dismantled and recovered. And we have big cars being trafficked to being smuggled to Bolivia. And there's a lot of details on it. I mean, where those cars could be dismantled. Okay, we have completely illegal dismantling yards, junk yards. We have legal ones. We have more or less the ones who have documents, papers, but they really receive and host some stolen cars at the end. So we have different types of dismantling yards. So let's put one trajectory showing one type, another trajectory showing the other type. And we have cars being exchanged buy cocaine, but we have cars being exchanged by guns. So let's do it. The cars being that completely disappear, and parts normally are sold in other cities. So let's put some stuff like that so we can reconstruct the typical journeys of those stuff. So doing this, we reached 5 typical journeys and really try to discuss each step of this journey, if it was typical or not, and how could we prove it with data. No, look at that, and new information came saying that this is not the most stolen car anymore, so let's change, etc., etc. And who are people who rob cars? Who are people who do theft, non-violent theft? They are completely different social groups. We didn't know at the beginning, but the people who are doing theft are specialized people with a lot of technology, and same small groups doing a lot of stuff. And the guys who are robbing with a gun are Samuels. So we have to reconstruct the theft and the robbery differently. So and some cars, some journeys start with with robberies, others with theft, because it's balanced the quantity. So that was the way we did, and doing this, we arrived to 5 journeys, and we crossed those journeys through the chapters, and it was very hard to do, but very nice as well, because we could discuss the insurance through a trajectory, a journey, and things like that, and the auctioneer, and the exportation, and the dismantling law, and the politics behind the law, etc., and the urban effects of it, and violence. Second chapter is mostly about violence in this market. It was very interesting, because the state is worried about the thief, and the insurance company is worried about the car. The insurance company really doesn't care who is the thief. They want to recover the car. And the state really doesn't care what car is this, and they won't recover the car. They only fight and hunt the thief. So the journeys were made to allow us to discuss those issues that we could find in the field.
Okay, thank you very much, Gabriel Fortran and Laurent Fourchat, for your presentation, discussion, and this insightful debate.